What's up guys, my name is Itai and today I have two more mating patterns that are very key for you to win games in chess. Let's go! First though, below me you can find timestamps for all the important parts of the videos so you can kind of skip around and find what you need when you need it. Let's get into the first mate of today's video. First up we have Anderson's mate. This is the most simple position of it, and obviously this is the position that you want to memorize so in an actual game you can figure out how you can use this and actually land yourself in something that looks like this. The rook can also be a queen here. Essentially you want a pawn that controls these two pretty big squares, and a king that kind of protects the pawn and also keeps an eye on another square. You just swing over your rook, and obviously this is mate. This isn't too difficult to find, but then if you take it into a real game example like this, all of a sudden it looks much more difficult and hard to find. But in this example, it's no different, and these are the positions where you want to memorize these simple versions that can later on sorry about that. You want to memorize these simple versions that later on will be able to help you in the more complex versions of the Anderson's mate. So here, pause the video for sure if you need any time to try to figure it out. Now let me actually go ahead and tell you the solution. You capture the pawn, the king has to capture the queen back, and now you go ahead and you swing over your rook. And the opponent can delay the mate by bringing the rook over, but this again only just delays the mate. And now notice that if the opponent goes here, you have Anderson's mate, so that's no good. But if the opponent goes here, that's also not good, because after the queen promotes and the opponent grabs the rook, you can go ahead and this is also mate here. So one important thing to take away from this specific example is that in an actual pattern in chess, you don't always end up mating with the pattern, but sometimes you use it. So for example here, you can see that in the actual end position of a mate, this isn't the Anderson's mate. But you use the fact that if the opponent decides to go here, this will be Anderson's mate. So you can use still a mating pattern to essentially force the king to a place where it can get mated another way. So sometimes, if you have a mating pattern that you can use, it doesn't always lead to you finishing off the game with the mating pattern on the board. But you can use it to then, force your opponent into a very bad position. And sometimes in this position it ends up being a mate, but sometimes maybe you force your opponent to lose their queen or a rook. So, even though mating patterns, the biggest goal is to use them to mate, sometimes you force your opponent, to do things that they don't want to do. And so that's also a good reason that you need to know these mating patterns. Let's move on to the second simple version of the mating pattern, and then obviously an in-game example after that of the second mating pattern. Okay, next up we have the Arabian Mate, which I'm very excited to share. For this one specifically, I have an in-game example from an actual game. Usually I just show you examples that could appear in games, but this one actually happened in a real game. So it does go to show how these mates, they're not only for you to memorize and then never use, they actually happen in real games. Okay, so for this mate, the simple version, obviously, like I first share, is essentially where you have a knight, and with the pairing of either a queen or a rook, you can then send that rook or the queen over here, and the knight supporting it can then checkmate your opponent, as the knight also supports this square here. You can see that for this mate, you don't actually use your king, unlike the previous mate that I just shared. So it is nice. And there are a lot of spots on the board where you can do this. You can obviously do it here, but then you can also do it, this way, obviously. Basically anywhere that the knight can support, right? So here, these two squares it can happen, these two squares, these two, not that, and these two, okay? So there are quite a few positions on the board where this can happen, so you just have to be looking out for them. And well, let's get into the example. And like I said, this is from a real game that happened, and the player who played as black found this beautiful way to use the Arabian Mate to then go ahead and checkmate their opponent. Pause the video, again you're playing as black, and try to find how you can use the Arabian Mate, and it's very beautiful. Okay, so now I'll go ahead and tell you. you should, when you're looking for the Arabian Mate specifically, you should find the knight, because you know that, the knight is the big piece here. Although, the rook actually checkmates, you need the knight to then support the rook. So here you found the knight, and, you still need to, figure out how you can actually do it. And so you go here, and, your opponent is forced to take with the rook, and this opens up this mate here. It's just so beautiful because, initially, if we go ahead and look back, initially this, if the rook wasn't here, would have already been the Arabian Mate, because the knight supports this square as well. So if the rook wasn't here, this would have been the Arabian Mate. But, the rook is here, so it just makes life a little bit more difficult, but clearly not that much more, because the rook leaving the spot here opens up this other Arabian Mate. It's just very, very nice. And this mate, you can see how flexible it is, right? If the rook wasn't here, then this would have been enough. But, this mate, you can do it on so many squares on the board that it's very important for you to be looking out for where you can do it. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. First of all, I wanted to say that, first of all, before we end the video, someone commented and told me to make 2 mates in a video, just, so we don't spread them out, and so it's more jam-packed. And I totally agree. I think it's better. So leave in the comments if you prefer 1, 2, maybe even 3. What's your preference on the amount of mates that I share in each one of these videos? Also, tell me, any other recommendations you have, any, feedback that you have on my videos. I am always and constantly trying to improve and make them perfect for you. Finally, please consider subscribing if you're new. It takes a couple of seconds, and it's a good way for me to know if I'm helping people. So, make sure if you appreciate the videos, then you go ahead and subscribe and like the video if you like the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.